Today is Thursday, May 5th, 2011, and we are interviewing Felix Borisek.
Borisek. Yeah, it's Borisek, but people had a hard time pronouncing Borisek. It's just Borisek. Oh, my first sergeant, when I was over in England, he come to my name, he says, how do you pronounce that? And I told him Borisek. He says, Borisek, that's the way it's going to be. I said, yes, sir. So it was Borisek after that.
And we're at the LaSalle, Illinois Veterans Home.
Yep.
And Mr. Boris was born November 17th, 1970. My name is Cheryl Walker, and I am with the Illinois Secretary of State Library,
Okay.
and I will be interviewing you. Could you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
I was in the 8th Air Force, where I was a mechanic on B-17 four-engine bombers over in England. We repaired the planes when they came back from Germany. They all shot up, and repaired them and sent them back out over Germany. And it was a good life. I had no complaints about that. I got 3 meals a day, and I had a bunk to sleep in. But it got cold, because over in England they don't have too much heat. But we survived. Had leather jackets, leather pants, and boots when it got real cold. So we survived.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a bunch of nice guys to work with from all over the country. And I think they're all gone. I'm one of the last survivors. Even my officers are gone. They all died. So I was hoping that someday after we got home we'd have a meeting, a reunion, but we never did. So, you know, and yeah, I remember one day when the planes, we sent them out in the morning about, they started flying up about 5 o'clock, forming up above England in a big circle until all the planes got up there, and there was hundreds up there, and they took off towards Europe, and they were gone all day. I don't know, it was 7 or 8 hours, and they started coming back, and we were out there to greet them. And if the plane shot a flare out of the window, it meant there was one of the members was wounded or killed, you know, and that plane got to land first, and I would service the plane, get the injured out, and they were directed to a certain area, and the other planes, when they come, they all landed. And I was in the 302 First Service Squadron, and we were a different unit than the planes. The members of the planes, or the squadrons, they had separate units and different squads. So we had different areas on the base that we lived in and bunked in. And but we got to get to know most of them. And one guy in particular, we had a little pub, like we called it, where we had English beer and soda, and we were drinking there, my buddies and I had soda, and I heard a guy talking behind me, and I recognized the voice that I hadn't seen in 3 years or 4 years, and I turned around and hollered out, "Hey, John Farrar." And he says, "Oh, where are you?" And I said, "Over here." He came over. And it was John Farrar. He was a tail gunner on a B-17, one of the planes. So I was surprised to see him. So I got to meet him more often. And then there was Salmon Chop. He was worked in a shoe repair shop on First Street in LaSalle. And he got my address from my mother. And when he got my address, and he was stationed about, maybe 30 miles away, and I didn't know it. And he hitched a ride in one of the trucks that was delivering goods to our base. And he surprised me. And it was Salmon Chompy, nice guy. And then one night at the pub, I was drinking soda, and we were talking about going to the dances here locally. We had 3 different dance halls in LaSalle, and all big band dance halls. And we were talking about it, and some guy from behind me hollered out, he says, "Where are you from?" "Felix." And I says, "LaSalle." He says, "Oh, I'm from Utica." So it was a small world. So we got together and talked. And nice guy. He was in our outfit too. And anyway, about a month later, he got transferred out. They needed extra help in another base, and he was a mechanic. There was about 10 guys moved out, and there was a guy in our outfit from Texas, and he was a big braggart. He used to always go and flex his muscles and say, "Texas Tech's the best state in this nation, you know." And none of us could stand him, but we let him run off our shoulders, you know. But anyway, this guy from Texas and the guy from Utica were both transferred out. And about 2 weeks later, we got word back that this guy from Utica couldn't stand the guy from Texas any longer. So he pulled out on a knife and he was going to go after him. And his buddies held him down. And he got worried about that he'd be court-martialed. So while the guys were sleeping, he pulled out his carbine and shot himself over nothing, you know. And we felt sorry for him real bad. But those are some of the highlights. I made I made about 5 or 6 trips to London and went to Buckingham Palace and different sightseeing places around there, and the Thames River. And we went up into Scotland about 3 times. So the fort, they call it, and the castle up there in Scotland. And while I was up there, I saw a guy walking down the street, and here was a guy from my hometown. He lived in LaSalle on 9th Street, and I forgot his name now. I forget quite a bit. And he says, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, fine." He says, "Let's go and get tattooed." And I said, "Okay, let's go." So we went down to the tattoo shop, and they were closed. It was my lucky day. I felt, anyway, he says, "I'll meet you here in a month." And he mentioned a date, and about a month later, I went back and met him there in Scotland. And he, the day after I left, he had gotten a tattoo, and I didn't. So when I got back to see him again, and he had his tattoo, and I didn't. And he was from LaSalle, nice guy. He worked at West Fox too, and that's where I worked, was at West Fox. And he was the first sergeant in charge of a squadron that worked on the planes. Nice guy. And anyway, this guy, Johnny Farrar, he says, I'll talk to my captain of the ship, and when we go up on a practice flight, I'll ask if you can come up with us. And I said, okay. So he took me up twice, and we flew over England, not all over England, but in a certain area that we circled that we were allowed, you know, so you didn't run into other planes. And then after the war, I met him again, and we hashed over old times, you know. And I enjoyed being over there in England. I learned a lot from the English people, and they were poor people, and the guys would go to the pub in a village of Stowmarket, Ipswich County, and the guys would all buy him a drink, you know, because he didn't have any money. Nice guy. And one day, this guy from, I think he was from New Jersey, he worked in our outfit, and he said to this guy, he says, they were talking about where this guy lived. He was a part-time farmer, I guess. And anyway, he says, they were talking about dogs, because this guy in my outfit used to raise dogs, train them. And this guy from England said, I got a dog, you can't get in my yard. He's a mean one. This guy in our outfit says, oh yeah? And so he went back to the base, and there was a lot of wild dogs. Not wild, but dogs running around loose on the base, and he finally picked one that was a female, and she was in heat. And so he got out an old glove he had, and he rubbed her in the privates, and he put it in a bag. Then he went back to the guy's house. This is about probably a week or two later, and it was towards evening, and the dog come running out to the gate. It was a high gate, and the guy just reached over the gate with this glove. The dog just melted, and he led him right up to the door of the house. And the farmer was astonished. He says, how did you get in? Nobody can get in my yard. And he showed him the glove, and he was shocked. He says, I'll tell you what, next time we meet at the pub, I'll buy you a drink. The GI, my friend, told that farmer, so he bought him a couple of drinks. And we cemented relations, you know. But that was some of the good times we had. And let's see what else. The last winter I was there, I got pneumonia, and I didn't know where I was. I was so sick. And so the guys commandered a Jeep, and they knew an officer that had a Jeep. They borrowed it and took me down to the, well, it was supposed to be a hospital. It was, I forget what they called it. But anyway, I was in there for over a week. I didn't know where I was or what I was doing there. And, but my buddies, they made sure, we had to move our barracks we had to move from one barracks to another about a mile away, and my buddies took care of me. The one guy was from California. The tall guy, he was 6'3", I guess. And he slept in the upper bunk, and I slept in the lower bunk because he was tall. Nice guy. And we got to be quite a team. And he made sure that all my stuff was moved. So there was only somebody that looked after you, you know. And, I have no regrets being over there. I enjoyed it. hoping to go further in school, but I didn't. My dad was sick, so I had any money I made over in the service I sent home to my mother and helped support the family. There was 5 kids, and my one brother was over in Europe fighting the German army, and the other brother was in India working on transportation. They were hauling stuff from the, I forget the name of the ocean down there, or the sea, that hauled by train up to supply our troops. And so there was 3 of us in the service. And
So there was 3 of you in the service at the same time?
yeah.
And you all came home?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. We had, I had a neighbor, there were, I think there were 6 boys, and 5 of them were in the service. And one of them is here in the Veterans Home, George Race. He lived on my block, so we knew each other's families real well. And I called it the Italian neighborhood. I ate a lot of pastula, whatever, spaghetti. And when I wrote to my girlfriend, I told her I was coming. Well, before I went to the service, and she said, "How about getting married?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to get married, and if I don't come back, well, you'd be left alone." And I made a big mistake. We should have gotten married. But when I was over in England and wrote home to him I was coming home, and she says, "We're getting married." So when I got home, I met. I was dropped off in Rockford, Illinois, where that's at. There was another guy from LaSalle that got dropped off at the same time. The train that I was on ended up in Rockford, and we had to check in, and they went through all of our clothes, and if you had extra clothes, like we bought shorts and socks and pants and stuff. Well, they confiscated all of that. They were only allowed 2 pair of pants and I forget what else. So, yeah. And they had a pilot that was higher than this building, and a guy, Jewish guy from Chicago, bought all the. He bid on it, I guess, and I don't know how much he paid. He might have paid a couple of $1,000s, and he had $100,000 worth of clothing that he started out after the war selling the uniforms and clothes that were taken by the government, and they sold it to him. And why the government didn't leave us keep it, but they gave it to him, and he sold. He's a rich man today. That pile was really high. And and it was when we were released in Rockford. It was about 8:30 at night, and we didn't have any way to get home to LaSalle. And Rockford is on 51. Anyway, this one guy that was from Peru, Chicken Monroe, we called him. He was over in Europe, I forget what outfit, and he and I went out on the highway, hitchhiking, trying to get a ride south to LaSalle, and some guy stopped with a pickup truck loaded with chickens, crates of chickens. He asked which way we were going. He said, "Well, I'll go down about 10 miles, but I got to turn east. I got to go on another highway." I said, "We'll take the ride." So we rode for 10 miles back with the chickens, and then some guy come along and picked us up that was an insurance man, and he asked where we were going. We told him it was Sal, and he said, I'll give you a ride. He says, I gotta go east. He says, I should be turning off somewhere around Mendota, but he says, I'll take you all the way home. So he did. He took us and dropped me off at 3rd and Charter Street, and I only lived a block south. And Chicken Morrow, he took him to Peru where Chicken lived, right to the doorstep. A nice guy. And the family was waiting for me, and we had a nice reunion. I slept good that night. And then we had to go back to Rockford. It was a final discharge, and I forget how I got to Rockford. I didn't have a car. Somebody must have taken me, I've forgotten now, and went back home. And I communicated with quite a few of the guys after the war, but then some were getting sick, and some got married, and they had other interests, you know. And I think they're all dead by now. And being here, it's a little lonely, but they have different programs that help you, you know. And which is a blessing, because they get you out of bed that way. Otherwise, you're a couch potato. And the meals were good, I can't complain. And I was in a nursing home before I got here, and that was quite expensive. So I finally got in here. But I got a little ahead of myself. When they built this building, and after they got it through, they got it built, and they start taking GIs in, I came every week to help with bingo. I was one of the first ones. And I belonged to the VFW, American Legion, Catholic War Vets, and every one of them had programs. And if it wasn't a VFW I was with, it was a Legion or the Catholic War Vets. And so I got to know a lot of people that were in here. I was lucky to come home alive. Some never come back. I had one fellow that lived a block away from me. He was, I don't know what outfit he was in. He was the infantry. And he was on a ship on the coast of England, getting ready to go over to Germany, to France. And a German submarine snuck in at night and sunk the ship. Right there, right off the coast of England, right? And almost, I guess there was bodies flown all over. But those things happen. And I'm a past commander in the LaSalle VFW. I was commander 2 years, 2 different terms. And I was always active in the Legion and Catholic War Vets. And, but membership is dwindling, and they're all having a hard time. And people are forgetting that we all served, and most of the clubs or organizations now are civilian, you know. They have their own interests, and so that veterans organizations are all struggling. And, so we have to try and keep it in front of the people as much as we can, so that they realize that some of the guys never come back. And I was in Tennessee, and I was working on airplanes down there training, and I was walking past a guy. He was trying to take the rim off a tire off a big plane, and he had a big sledgehammer. I couldn't even lift the sledgehammer, it was so heavy. He was beating it, you know. And I went over to him, I tapped him on the shoulder. He says, "That ain't the way to do it." I said, I'll show you. I grabbed a steel bar, and I flipped it, and unlocked it, and I opened it up and released the tire. And here I was probably about 150 pounds, and he was about 250. And he was using the sledgehammer. And I never forgot that, because I was mechanically inclined. I worked at Westclox and worked on wristwatches, pocket watches, clocks, and I worked on Saturdays and Sundays. I did repair work for people. I fixed bathrooms, toilets, sinks, changed lights, power lines, and everything to make an extra buck, because we had 4 kids we had to support, and Mary Kay, the oldest girl, she went to Illinois State, and she was a school teacher up in Minnesota. And she retired last year. She's 70 now, I think. I don't know. She's 62. She retired. Her husband was a teacher too, and they're living very good. Old teachers, you know, getting good pensions. And Jim, the oldest boy, he lives in Springfield, Missouri, and when he come home from the service, he graduated from Illinois State too, and he decided maybe he'd go try farming, and he farmed for a while, and then he started working in a garage selling cars and repairing cars, and then he made enough money. He bought a resort in Missouri, and he had a resort for I don't know, 6 or 8 or 10 years, I guess. We used to go down there for the summer, and he married his high school sweetheart, and when they were down in Missouri, she ran into the Jehovah's Witness, and Jim says to her, he says, "You can't do that." He says, "If you're going to join them, you got to move out." She moved out. She come with the couple of women with the truck, and they took all the good linens and out of the house, you know. And he had a resort. I forget how many cabins, but she only took it out of the house. And but what swayed her to join the Jehovah's, I don't know. Nice girl too, real nice, and her parents were nice. But I think her mother was real strict. She was a very, what do you call it, disciplinarian, and I think she couldn't do things on her own. Her mother was controlling her, I think, and then she got that way. Anyway, she joined the Jehovah's Witness Church, and she met one of the leaders from New York, and she married him. I saw her when her dad died a couple of years ago. I saw her at the wake. She looks good. Like she acted like nothing happened. But anyway, Mary Kay, Jim, and Janice. She lives in Pekin, Illinois. She went to Illinois Valley Community College, and I told her to go to Illinois State. She says, "Oh, I don't have to go there." And she was having a good time. She was liked to play, and so she finished at Illinois Valley College, and she got a job. And she's doing well. She's doing very good. Her husband works at Caterpillar, and they're doing very good. She's got a good head on her. She works at a company that's it's a bookstore. They ship books to high schools, colleges, and she does the bookkeeping. She's got a good job. And then Jay is the youngest one. He liked to play too, and he married a girl from Peru, and she was a nice girl. And I was down at, they invited me, my wife and I, down for supper in Peru, and Jay and his wife were living in Peoria, and they come home, and when they come in, and the mother met them, and she had a basket full of clothes, and the mother says, "What are you going to do with those clothes?" She says, "I'm going to wash them." "Where are you going to wash them?" She said, "Your machine." She says, "Not my machine." And I stepped out and I said, "Well, take them over to my house." I said, "The house isn't lot, wash them over there." So she washed them over there. So the mother was a strong type person that, I don't know, she was out of control, I think. But anyway, they had one daughter, and then, well, they moved around quite a bit. They were in Chicago, and they were down in Texas, and then they moved back to Chicago again. And while she was in Texas, she met some guy on the side, and she was corresponding, and Jay didn't know it. And then when they moved to the Milwaukee area, and they were living there, and she divorced Jay. And the guy came up from Texas and married her and was living there in town. Anyway, that was going on for about 2 years, and all of a sudden, this guy that married Jay's wife, I forget her name now. I forget her. Anyway, they came home, and she came home, I guess, from work. She worked in a bank, and he shot himself. And so who did she call? She called Jay. So Jay had to go clean up the mess. And anyway, and Jay was married at the time. He was remarried, and he survived it, and they took her in, and she lived with Jay and his wife for about a month till things got settled down, and she moved back. About a month ago, I got a letter from her, and she apologized for all that she did, and I don't know if she went to a psychiatrist. She finally went to a good psychiatrist, and he opened up her mind and showed her where she was wrong, and she apologized, and so I forgave her. And my wife died 10 years ago, and she was born and raised out on the farm in Melvin, Illinois, and a big family. And when we had Mary Kay, then Catherine was pregnant with a second child, and we lived in an apartment, and her folks came up to visit us, and he says, "I want to talk to you in the kitchen." I said, "Okay." He says, what's your hurry, having two kids so close together? I said, I'm trying to catch up with you. You had 6. He turned around and walked to the other room and never said a word. But we got along. So that's some of my life. You got any questions?
You said that you had received injuries when you jumped out of a plane?
No, I didn't jump out of a plane.
Jumped off of a plane?
Off of a plane. What happened, I was working on the B-17 wing, and the UFO came into our area, and they parked right by the plane was outside the hangar, and they parked right near the hangar, and I didn't know it, but they put one of those wooden horses to keep people back. So I jumped off the wing of the plane. I hit the darn horse, and I didn't go to sick call, and I hobbled along for a couple of weeks. I should have went to sick call, because after I got home, when I was home a couple of years, the knee went bad and I had to get it replaced. But I couldn't collect anything because I didn't report it.
What, you didn't receive any medals or special service awards?
Good conduct, and I forget what else, victory medal and those regular things. Nothing special. I didn't do anything spectacular. I helped keep the planes flying. I remember one incident. I was working on the engine, and I found out that they have a safety. They call it a safety wire. Goes through the heads of the bolts to make sure they don't loosen up. And it was wired up wrong. So I reported to my first sergeant, and he said, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, it's wrong." I went and got the book and I showed him. So he went over to the instrument shop and contacted the guy. I knew the guy that was working there. He's from Illinois. And he came over and he took the wire out and redid it like I said it should have been. And he got mad at me. He wouldn't talk to me after that. But it was the safety of the plane. Because if any vibration, those engines will vibrate all the time. And if you don't have the heads of the bolts wired to loosen up, pop out, and either the fuel pump or some oil pump or something will fall off, and the plane will go down, or the engine will go down and affect the planes. And anyway, because of that, he wouldn't speak to me anymore.
But you could have saved those
Yeah.
guys' lives.
Yeah.
So that was important.
Huh?
That was important.
Oh, yeah. To me, it was important. You know, that same thing. I was going to aviation school in New York City. I forget the name, but I was there for 3 months and learning about different instruments and planes flying, and they had regular instructors. And this one instructor was talking about something about the wind. I don't remember what it was that it was in the book, and he was talking about it without the book, and he made a statement, and I called him on it. Well, before I go any further, I overshot myself. There was an award out that they were going to give a gold pocket watch to the GI that had the best grade, and that's what I was shooting for. I stayed in and studied at night and Sundays, and some of these guys were college guys. They wouldn't stay in, they knew it all, you know. So anyway, the instructor was talking about this, the plane flying at certain altitude, and I called him on it. He made a wrong statement, and I called him and I says, "That isn't what the book shows." He says, "Well, the book doesn't count. It's what I know." So I said, "Well, you're wrong." And I went to another classroom and I asked the instructor over there, and he was a pilot. He said, "You're right." Well, when the grades came out, 30 days later, he gave me a failing grade. He gave me, instead of giving me a 94, he gave me a 70. And it was enough to bring me down, so I lost the watch. But, you know, and you know, this a similar incident happened with my daughter. She was going to LP and in high school, and there was something in English class that the instructor said something, made a remark, and my daughter called him on it. She said, "That's wrong." He said, "Oh, no, I'm right." And when the end of the month come along, he gave her a failing grade, and so she lost some special points, you know. So the following month, when the grades came out again, I was with her. She was a freshman, and she introduced me, and I said, "Oh, you're the one that gave her a failing grade because you made a mistake." He said, "Well, I didn't make any mistake." But there you are. This guy he was considered to be a brilliant man, but, and I see him at church. He's one of these churchgoers, but he lied. So, yeah, have to, you know, those are things that I learned, that you trust people to a limit. From there, you're on your own. So, and I'm sure other people have had the same problems in life, and you don't have anybody to back you up. But I survived, got married, had 4 kids, and they're all living. They got Janice got 1 girl, and Jay got 1 girl, and Mary Kay's got 5 children, and Jim's got 1 boy. So they're all doing good. But you have to be, I call it, persistent. You don't give up. I've seen that so often, and I only stood up for my rights. And I think they should teach that more in school. But they're, you know, the kids that are at a disadvantage, if they call a teacher on something, like happened to me and my daughter, the teacher gets back at you. That shouldn't be. The teacher should say, "Yes, you're right," you know, if they're wrong. And you got any questions, Alice, other than that?
I think you've done a wonderful job.
Good. I made the best of it being in the service. I did everything I was supposed to, and I made sure that all the work we did was up to par, so the planes would always come back. Otherwise, when we used to greet the planes when they come back, we'd see the red flares fly out, and we started counting. Well, there's 1 or 2 aboard that's been killed, and then at one time, that one plane came back. There are 4 engine planes, B-17s, 4 big well, I can't reach across each propeller. And this plane started gliding in, and it had only one engine rotating. The others were all still. And everybody was saying, oh my God, there must be wounded aboard. And what we learned later, when they were coming back from Europe, and they left France, they emptied everything that was loose in the plane. Seats, parachutes, everything to lighten the load to make sure the plane would make it all the way back to England. And I talked to a couple of guys I knew personally, and they said that happened quite a bit. They dumped the machine guns out, everything that was loose went to make sure they got back. And the one position that nobody really cherished was the ball turret gunner. That was the one underneath. And they would be in a cramped position like this, but they didn't stay in there all the time. They only went into them when they were going into an area where they were protecting the planes they were shooting. But if there was a lot of flak coming up, they got out of it. Because if flak hit the ball turret and they couldn't turn, they couldn't get out. And if the plane went down, they went down with it. And they'd be in that turret with their hands like this, the knees up around their ears. And the turret would go around different directions. And one guy, a friend of mine, Earl Bruni, he lives in Peru. I went to high school with him, nice guy. And I met him over at the Veterans Home in Peru, and I stayed there, and he was there. We hashed out old times, and I asked him about, because I knew he was a ball turret gunner. He says, they were dangerous. He says, we got out of there when the flak was heavy, but he survived. And he's not driving anymore either. He's about my age. I don't know if he's 92 or 91 or something like that. And we went to high school together. And in fact, I sat in front of him alphabetically, B-O-R, and he was B-Y-R, B-R-E-U-I-N-G, Bruning. And we talked about old times, and there's one girl that, she was nice, blonde. She had long hair. Somebody put the ponytail in the inkwell. And I got the blame for it, and I didn't do it. And I mentioned it to him. He says, I remember that. He says, I didn't do it either. But somebody pulled a prank. So I'm glad to be here, and I wish you well, and I hope you have some nice interviews.
Oh, we do.
This Frank Eister, he lived a block away from me, good friend of mine, and he was over in Japan, in the islands, the Japanese War, and he was in the infantry, and he said they shot a lot of Japanese. He says he got I don't know if I should mention or not, but he says over there it was either kill or be killed. He says, and I wasn't going to get killed. And he says they'd charge these Japanese with the bayonets and stab them. And one guy he stabbed, he cut off his head and put it on the fence post. They were mean. I mean, really mean, you know. To survive or be killed. And he says, I regret doing that, but he says, at that time, it was either me or him. And he says, and I think it affected him when he got home. He worked in Ottawa at a bakelite or someplace, and he had one boy. He lives. The one boy lives around 60 miles from here. He came down to Cindy a couple of times. And anyway, people don't realize what some of these guys went through. People get upset over something and it's minor, and these guys can't help it. I'm sure there's guys in this building here that saw a terrible action, and I wouldn't dare ask them. And that way, you know, people that weren't living during the war, they don't realize what it was that these boys had come back, and my brother-in-law married my sister, Frank Rathman from Peru. He was over in the Battle of the Bulge. He was over there fighting the Germans, and they got surrounded. And there's 250,000, something like that. Americans were surrounded by the Germans, and they didn't have enough to eat. And it was out in the farm country, and there was a farmer that had a farm near their prison. They had, it was all staked out with a big fence around there, but they could get out, and when the farmer's wife peeled the potatoes to have potatoes for supper, they threw the potato peelings out to the pigs, and these GIs watched. Whenever they saw the peelings go flying, they went after them. They were close to them, you know. So they fought the pigs for the peelings. And people don't realize what some of them had to go through. I'm sorry I took so much time.
Oh, no, you didn't. You did not.
Went up and I forget, there was something we did up in Scotland, and it was a special place to go, and I forgot about that now, and I don't remember what we did up there, but it was nothing wrong, but it was something that every visitor would go and either rub the nose of something, you know. And the people are nice up in Scotland. And we come over on the Queen Mary from the United States over to England, and they told us they had a cable about this large in diameter, went all the way, just like that table there, went all the way around the ship. I forget how many, the ship must have been 250 feet long, so it must have been about 600 feet cable, and that was used to demagnify any magnetic bombs that were dropped in the ocean floor. And because if you didn't have the device on, they invented that special for the Queen Mary. If they didn't do that, it would raise the depth bombs right up out of the floor and they'd explode. So we didn't have to worry, and we traveled pretty fast. And then we went up along the American coast, up past Canada, and then way up by Newfoundland, then over into Scotland. That's where we de-embarked. And but the German subs were out there, and we never saw any. Oh, and then another episode that happened on board ship on the Queen Mary. We were about 2 days out of the United States port, and there was a group of black boys. They got into a fight between themselves. Whoever was fighting threw two of them overboard out there in the middle of the Atlantic, and word got out that two men were overboard, and the captain of the ship was supposed to have said, we can't turn around, we can't stop, we can't do anything, we gotta keep going, or else they'll sink us. So they were out there someplace, they drowned. Yeah, and then I got a little ahead of myself. When we were boarding the Queen Mary in New Jersey there someplace, I forget the name of the port, and we were waiting our turn on the shore, and they said there was a fight up there on the gangway. They were loading the black boys. Most of them were truck drivers. They weren't infantry. There was someone into the infantry, but this one group was truck drivers. They didn't want to go on the ship. They're afraid of water. They never were near water, you know. And they were, the MPs had to get a hold of them and shackle them and take them on board ship. And I wouldn't say that in front of black people. You know, might make them mad, you know, but that actually happened. So there's a lot of strange things. So, and I can't think of anything else right now. I had a statement that I wrote back a couple of years ago, and I don't know what I did with it, the different things that happened, and I misplaced it, I guess. And this is good for, did it help some in schooling, or these youngsters don't realize what's happening in this world. It's just like now with that Bin Laden, you know, some of the people says, how come they went after him? Well, he killed a lot of people. In fact, they're building the skyscrapers there in New York that he had blown up. And but people forget. They didn't lose their lives. There was, I forget how many 5,000 or so people killed there, plus several other planes that went down. And he was very smart. And it took them a long time that they got him. They said, well, somebody said, well, they shouldn't kill him. I says, he would have beat the courts. He would have beat the courts. This way, everybody knows he's done.